Hello friends, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new here for the first time. Today we're going to be looking at a major misconception in the cannabis world, and it's the misconception that higher THC percentages mean a better product. A little spoiler for you in case you didn't know, that's not always the case, and there's actually a lot more going on when it comes to the quality of your cannabis experience. So today in this video, we're going to break down how we even got into this situation in the first place, what the situation actually is, and what we can do about it going forward. Because if you'll recall, this entire channel is about intentional consumption, and the purpose of intentional consumption is to help you achieve the outcomes that you're actually seeking. So even if you're looking to get as high as possible, choosing the highest percentage of THC still might not be the right choice for you. And if your intended purpose in consuming cannabis is actually something other than getting as high as you possibly can, then choosing products based on the THC percentage definitely isn't the right choice for you. So let's take a look at what's really going on. First, we want to take a look at the context of the situation, because setting the stage is always important for understanding an issue in a fulsome way. So let's start by talking about how we even got to the point that we're at today, where consumers are seeking higher and higher THC percentages, and producers and labs seem happy to comply with that request. Now, I'm in Canada, which of course legalized cannabis production and consumption for of-age Canadians on October 17, 2018. Now, since then, we've seen quite a bit of regulation at the state level in the US, so I'll address that as well. Now, when cannabis was initially legalized and regulated in Canada, Health Canada, which is the governing body who created the regulations, created the initial regulations, of course, around that product. Now, Health Canada stated that the three main reasons for their regulations were to, 1, protect the youth from accessing cannabis, 2, keep profits out of the hands of criminals, and 3, protect public health and safety by ensuring that of-age Canadians had access to high-quality and safe cannabis. As part of that regulation, they, for some reason, decided that no one should ever be able to sensually experience the weed before they purchased it. I don't know, the reason was probably like to save the children or something, to prevent kids from ever seeing weed. But the regulation stated that cannabis had to be in sealed, child-proof containers, and companies weren't even allowed to include a plastic window for viewing the product. This left consumers with only the packaging to go on, and the cannabinoid content became the most prominent feature that they could use to evaluate quality. Now, this has not only been the case in Canada, but in various locations in the US as well. Both Florida and New Hampshire require plain packaging, and we have packaging opacity laws in 16 different states as well, including Alaska, Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and West Virginia. Okay? But all jurisdictions, including all states where weed is produced and all Canadian provinces, require Delta-9 THC content to be listed on the package. Now, have you ever heard the phrase, what gets measured gets managed? This is the idea that when something is tracked or quantified, it gets more attention. When you measure a specific outcome, like THC content, you're focusing on it, bringing awareness to it, and making it easier or more important to manage, adjust, or improve. Conversely, if a particular aspect isn't measured, it gets overlooked because there's no data to act on, making it difficult to see how important it is or how well it's performing. Because THC percentages are one of the only measurable qualities listed on the packaging, that metric becomes the focus of consumer decisions. Other important factors like terpene profiles or how the cannabis feels are harder to quantify, so they're ignored. And people tend to make choices based on the one thing they can measure, even if it's not the best indicator of quality. In the absence of any other metrics, especially ones that you would use to evaluate an agricultural product, the easily quantifiable numbers like THC and CBD content start driving consumer purchasing decisions. When the only metric that you have available is THC percentage, then that's the metric that you're going to use to evaluate what's inside the package. Despite all the regulations that might seem to indicate otherwise, cannabis is an agricultural product. It is grown and then consumed. So let's stop and think for a minute about how consumers evaluate agricultural products. When you go to the store to buy produce, an agricultural product, you don't evaluate it by the strength of its components. You don't evaluate an orange by the strength of its oranginess. You do a number of different things to evaluate it. You look at it, you look at the color, the size, the shape, the overall freshness, right? You pick up a package of berries. Are there blemishes on these berries? Do they look good? Are they moldy? Right? Number one, you look at it. Number two, you smell it. Aroma is an important part of evaluating an agricultural product. If you're buying fruit or berries or fresh herbs, you are definitely smelling that product to make sure that it's fresh and of a high quality. If I'm buying fresh basil in the store and I smell it and it smells like hay, I'm not buying it. I'm buying a different one. You're also going to feel it. The texture or the firmness give you a lot of information about the quality. You pick up that tomato and you squeeze it. Is it mushy and gross? You're not buying it. You're finding one that's firm. You might even listen to it, right? I like to give my melons a thump when I buy them, because the more low-pitched and hollow the sound, the closer it is to ripe. Obviously, you're going to taste it, right? If you go to a farmer's market, a lot of times they'll have different samples of fruits or vegetables out for you to try so that you can see how fresh and delicious they are. So the sensory metrics are the main metrics that we use to evaluate produce, agricultural products, things that are grown. It's only after we've evaluated the produce on these sensory metrics that we look at things like origin or production method, how it was grown, is it organic, is it non-GMO? And then we might look at the packaging and the presentation. And finally, the price for the product compared to other options and the value for your money. Cannabis, like any other agricultural product, should be evaluated on multiple sensory factors like smell, appearance, and feel. But due to the current regulations in many jurisdictions, consumers are often prevented from engaging with the product in the same ways. They can't touch it, they can't smell it, they can't see it outside of the sealed packaging. And that leaves you with only the THC percentage or the cannabinoid content as the primary metric. Well, this makes cannabis one of the few agricultural products that consumers, for some reason, have to evaluate almost entirely based on packaging information, rather than sensory engagement or actual quality indicators. And I would argue that in fact it's more important for a cannabis consumer to be able to evaluate the product using sensory information than it is for an orange consumer, because there's no negative outcome if you have an orange that isn't as fresh as possible. But there is a negative outcome if you're consuming the cannabis that is not right for you and your system. Now, there are a few major problems with using THC percentage as your main metric of quality. First of all, relying only on the THC percentage is just a bad idea. Cannabis has a lot of moving parts, a lot of different components, and THC is only one of them. The experience you get from a product also depends on other cannabinoids present in the plant, like CBD and CBG, as well as the full terpene profile and flavors in the plants and other compounds that are found there as well. So using only one single metric to evaluate the cannabis inside the package is like using only the lead actress's performance to evaluate how good a movie is. If that's your only metric, then you're missing out on all of the other things that are included in the movie, like the setting or the costumes or the dialogue or the writing or the cinematography, the sound production, the performances of all the other actors in the movie. You can't call a movie good or bad based only on the acting of one principal, but that's what people do with THC. Now, the second problem with using THC percentage as the main quality metric is that it ignores the importance of the sensory compounds in the plant. For example, terpenes. Now, terpene profiles have a significant impact on the outcome of an overall experience of a product, and they're important for both flavor and effects. In fact, they're maybe more important for flavor and effects than THC is. You might have already heard of the steering wheel and engine analogy, but I'll share it again because it's a good one. You can liken any cannabis experience to taking a drive in a car. Now, you're going to go some distance away from your normal state of being, and it could be in any direction, right? Now, THC and CBD are like the engine in your car, in your cannabis experience. Now, the cannabinoid amount and ratio is going to determine how far you get or how altered you will become from your normal state of being. Consume a lot of THC and very little CBD, you're going to go pretty far from your normal state of being. Consume a little THC and a lot of CBD, you won't go as far from your normal state of being. Now, if the cannabinoids are like the engine, the terpenes are like the steering wheel of your experience. They determine whether your experience will be uplifting or sedating or creative or focused or any of the other number of outcomes that a cannabis experience can have. And that's just terpenes. I haven't even mentioned flavonoids or esters or volatile sulfur compounds or any of the other compounds and molecules that contribute to the outcome of a cannabis experience as well. And in addition to THC, all of the other cannabinoids present in the plant, including CBG and CBC and THCV, and anything else that's there, also contributes to a well-rounded therapeutic experience. Personally, I've had much better experiences lately when I've combined high amounts of CBG with my THC than I ever had from just high THC alone. It's a much more holistic and well-rounded and therapeutic experience. When you bring all of the compounds together in a balanced way, it's like getting a warm hug from cannabis rather than being smacked in the face with THC. Cannabis is a unique product, and despite me comparing it to other agricultural products, it's not just like an apple or an orange, for example, right? Consuming cannabis alters you on a systemic level, and it can impact many parts of your being. It can change not only your body, but your mind and your perspective shift. Your mood lightens, and difficult emotions become easier to carry. It can alter the way you connect with others, with a higher power, or with yourself. It can allow you to tap into your innate creativity or focus better on your work. There are lots of powerful applications across the many dimensions of who we are as human beings. And because of this multidimensionality, when you consume a product like cannabis, you also have to take a fulsome approach to understanding all of the factors in your experience. Now, we've already talked about cannabinoid amount and ratio and terpene profile, which are generally the two most widely recognized factors in a cannabis experience. But there are two other factors which are at least as important, and those are the personal biology of the consumer going into the experience and the consumer's set and setting. Now, if you've ever consumed psychedelics, you probably already know about set and setting. And by that, I mean your mindset, which is your mood and the expectations that you have going into the experience. And setting refers to the environment in which you're consuming, including the place and the people and the vibes. Now, by personal biology, I'm referring to the endocannabinoid system, which is, of course, a body system that all mammals have, whose purpose is to facilitate communication between our body's different systems so that your body maintains homeostasis. It stays happy and balanced and functioning in the best way for you. So it's these four factors together that create the outcome of a cannabis experience. Shopping based on THC content alone doesn't take into account three of the factors and barely takes into account one of them, because you're not even considering all of the other cannabinoids present in the product that contribute to your experience. Arguably, the best way to purchase cannabis that is right for your needs in any given moment is to actually smell the flower and let your body do the talking. In my experience, and in the experience of many people I've spoken to who have consumed cannabis for a long time for a variety of reasons, they're able to determine the right strain for their needs in that moment by actually smelling the product and then listening to their body's response. Because your body can absolutely go, oh, yeah, that's the right product for me, or no, that is not the right product for me. You can have a visceral reaction to the way cannabis smells, and that is an indicator as to whether or not that product is right for you in that moment. But by disallowing people from smelling or even seeing the weed before they consume it, Health Canada and other regulatory bodies have effectively constrained consumers to the metric of cannabinoid amount. Now, this was actually something that I spoke about years ago, and I noted that this had become and was going to become an increasingly large problem. I wrote a blog post in 2022 that I will link in the description because it has in fact become worse, just as I predicted. Another problem with using THC percentage as the main quality metric is that now that's what's been measured, so that's what gets managed, and we have rampant THC inflation in the marketplace. THC percentages just keep getting higher and higher, despite the fact that it's creating negative outcomes in consumers, like increased tolerance, more anxiety and paranoia among users, and even a higher prevalence of cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is a relatively new development and something we didn't see much prior to legalization. This tunnel vision focus on THC leads to some pretty shady business practices. Producers shop around at different labs to get different THC results. They'll send a sample off to 4 or 5 different labs and then choose to report only the best number that they get back. There are actually approved labs that you can call up and say, hey, this is the percentage that I need, and magically, that is the percentage that will appear on your COA, as long as you've paid enough to have the lab run all the different tests that they need to get you to that number. Producers also game the testing process by manipulating the way samples are handled and dried to boost their numbers artificially. They over-dry their bud to send it in for testing because THC percentage is reported as a percentage of total weight. So if you have no moisture left in your bud because it's been overly dried, then the weight goes down and the THC number as a percentage of total weight goes up. Also, if you just sprinkle a little keef on your bud before you send it to the testing facility, it's also going to increase your THC percentage and no one's going to know the difference. And some testing methods select the most resinous parts of the flower for testing. So this will skew the THC levels upwards too, even though the majority of the flower doesn't contain that high of a concentration. Then as a result, the THC percentages listed on the package are actually unreliable for consumers who are looking for the best quality product. You might see 32% THC on a package, but the average consumer won't actually experience that level of potency. Plus, then consumers end up choosing products based on numbers that aren't even accurate, which really doesn't give them the best experience. Compounding the fact that there's now the increasingly common consumer perception that more THC equals better quality, even though that's not even remotely true. Consumers are missing a significant amount of education as to what makes an actual quality cannabis product. But instead of treated, we get tricked. And in today's market, percentages are often used as a marketing tool. And some producers and dispensaries have also learned that consumers gravitate towards higher THC percentages, assuming that more THC equals better quality or a stronger high. This perpetuates this myth that high THC equals good weed. And as a result, producers say, well, if that's what consumers want, that's what we'll make. And it just continues this cycle of ignorance and misinformation and deceit. Now here's another layer to add on. It's actually almost impossible to grow dried flower with over 30% THC. I one time met Steve D'Angelo at a cannabis conference, and he's considered by some to be the father of legal cannabis, I think they call him. He's a pioneer in the cannabis field. And this was several years ago, and I asked him, I said, what do you think about the THC percentages that we're seeing creep higher and higher in the marketplace? And back then, we didn't really see things that were much higher over 30% yet. They were just starting to creep up. And he said to me, anytime I see something over 30%, it is very suspect to me. That's because cannabis plants, like all plants, have a natural limit. There's only so much resin and cannabinoids that they can produce. Now, THC is found primarily in the trichomes of the cannabis plant, which, as you can see from this picture, are like these crystally mushroom-looking like structures, the white stalks with bulbs on their heads. Now, those trichomes Those crystally structures are the sparkles that you see on dried bud when you purchase it, and they're responsible for producing cannabinoids and terpenes. Now, an experienced grower will engage in selective breeding. They'll make sure that they have optimal growing environments, and they'll use really precise cultivation techniques that can increase the density of trichomes. But there's a biological cap to how much THC a cannabis plant can naturally produce. Cannabis plants have to use energy to grow and carry out their biological functions, like producing cannabinoids and terpenes. And the structural compounds of the plant actually limit the amount of energy that they can dedicate to THC production. This means that pushing THC concentration higher and higher is extremely challenging without sacrificing other critical aspects of the plant. This is the case whenever we see something in nature that we are pushing out of balance because we want something that we perceive as higher value as the human race. Okay, even though it's not true, you push things in nature out of balance and you end up with a mess. Just look at the climate, for instance, right? We've pushed our environment out of balance and now we're experiencing the significant impacts of climate change. Now, cannabis flower is typically composed of 10 to 20% water content when it's properly cured. And most high-quality strains are going to naturally produce THC levels around 20 to 25% in dried flower. So when you see THC levels above 30%, know that you are venturing into unrealistic territory. You should absolutely view these extremely high percentages of THC in dried flower with a dose of skepticism because of the biological constraints that exist. Even with advances in genetics and cultivation, it's almost impossible for a plant to produce more than 30% THC in dried flower form while still maintaining the other compounds that contribute to the overall experience. So if a strain is claiming 35% THC, then you are likely dealing with inflated numbers or errors in testing or isolated circumstances that cannot consistently replicate those results. I said what I said. So if a strain is claiming 35% THC, then you are likely dealing with one of three things: inflated numbers, errors in testing, or isolated circumstances that cannot consistently replicate those results. I said what I said. Okay, so what's the problem with that then? Marketers, companies lie all the time. So what are the consequences of chasing high THC percentages for consumers? Well, consumers who chase after high THC percentages often miss out on the full spectrum of cannabis benefits. High THC concentrations can increase the risk of anxiety, paranoia, and other side effects, especially for people who are inexperienced or sensitive to THC. In rare cases, this can lead to cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. There was recently a New York Times article about how cases of this condition are increasing around North America, due largely to increased THC consumption. I'll put a link to the article in the description as well, so you can read it for yourself if you're interested in learning more about that. But focusing solely on THC percentages devalues the other important aspects of cannabis, like the flavor, the aroma, and the overall effects of the strain. Beyond that, it removes the consumer's responsibility for their own experience, namely understanding their personal biology and their needs going into a cannabis experience, and then being responsible for their set and setting while in that cannabis experience. By choosing cannabis based on a more holistic approach, considering terpenes, minor cannabinoids, and the overall experience, you're more likely to find a product that fits your needs, whether you're looking for relaxation, pain relief, creativity, or stress reduction. A lower THC strain with the right terpene profile might actually offer you a more enjoyable and effective experience than one with a falsely inflated THC number. So what should you be looking at besides THC? Well, I'll start with the terpene profile. Terpenes are aromatic compounds that affect how you feel. For example, a strain high in myrcene might be more sedative, whereas one high in pinene might help your focus and memory more. You can intentionally experiment with different terpene profiles to figure out what works best for you. And cannabinoid balance is also important. Strains with some CBD or CBG can help take the edge off the psychoactive effects of THC. When you're choosing the right cannabis for you, the ideal is to smell it and determine how your body feels when you smell it. Given the restrictions in many marketplaces, this isn't always possible. So if that's the case where you're buying weed, be sure to look at the full picture. Terpenes, cannabinoid ratios, and how the strain or product makes you feel or has made you feel in the past. Your personal experience matters way more than chasing high numbers on a label. The bottom line is this. The myth of 30% plus THC flower is fueled by an overemphasis on a single number. High THC does not equal high quality, and consumers need to be wary of choosing products solely based on THC percentages. Instead, you should be considering the balance of cannabinoids, terpenes, and the cultivation practices behind the product to find the best possible cannabis experience for you. Now, if you made it to the end of this video, thanks for sticking around. Please be sure to subscribe, like this video if you thought it was interesting and valuable, and leave a comment if you've got something to say.